Good evening, everyone. I call to order the meeting of the September 6th Portsmouth Community Network Broadband Authority. And Madam Secretary, would you call the roll?
Yes, ma'am. Mr. Barnes, Mr. Glover,
Here.
Mr. Hugo,
Present.
Mr. Moody, Mr. Tillage, Dr. Whitaker,
Present.
and Madam Chair Lucas Burke.
Here. All right. Welcome back after our brief summer hiatus. I think we all needed that. Seems that some of us still need a little bit more, but we're going to continue on. If everyone have the agenda before you, we've already called our roll. Next, we'll take a look at our minutes. If you will peruse those and notate any changes.
Move to approve.
Is there a second?
Second.
Madam Clerk, if you will call the roll.
Yes, ma'am. Mr. Barnes is absent. Mr. Glover?
Yes.
Mr. Hugo
Aye.
is absent. Mr. Tillage is absent. Dr. Whitaker?
Yes.
And Chairwoman Lucas Burke.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay. Next agenda item includes the discussion topics, the introduction of the broadband telecom services. And Ms. Cliff Hayes, if you will take the floor.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, Madam Chair, Madam Manager, Madam City Attorney, members of the authority, Madam Clerk. We have an update today for you regarding the fiber broadband project that we have going on in the city. In the way of an overview, what we will do today is to somewhat provide the progress that's going on now with our Portsmouth Next Generation Network that we have in the city. Then, of course, the introduction of our broadband telecom services, who is our contracted fiber consultant, Mr. Jeff Biku, who is with us. Then we'll go over some of the benefits of having the local ring that we have here in the city. There are some obvious benefits that we have, like the cost avoidance that we have with our government use. But then you'll see also during the presentation benefits that we have beyond just our limited government use and the cost avoidance. Also, we'll go over funding opportunities that we have available to us through federal and state funding, grants and grant opportunities that we have as a city. The VADI grant is one of them, and at this point, since 2017, there's been across the Commonwealth deployed some or allocated some $935 million. And then, of course, we have the BEAD funding, which is for broadband equity access and deployment is what the acronym stands for. $42 billion, an unprecedented amount of funding going towards broadband deployment around the country. Virginia's share is $1.48 billion that will come to the Commonwealth of Virginia for that deployment. I'll add that here recently, since 2017, in the Commonwealth of Virginia, we've seen records amount of funding going towards broadband deployment as well since 2017. At first, we thought it was a big deal to have some $700 million that was allocated for broadband deployment across the Commonwealth back in 2018 through 21, I believe it was. Now, we're talking on top of that, another $1.48 billion. So we're really working hard in unprecedented ways with unprecedented amount of funding to make sure that, one, unserved areas will be served, and then the underserved areas, in other words, their speeds may not be adequate, if you will, or haven't been adequate, And there's a process for us to challenge the federal maps that may say, well, there is adequate coverage already. We will go through a process here in the city of Portsmouth, and other localities will do the same to challenge the federal maps, what they say is adequately served across our city. Then, of course, we'll get into a little bit about the strategy that originally was laid out for what this should look like, what it should be for, and going forward, have some conversation about what that strategy should be like going forward. With that, I'll remind you that we have some 56 government facilities or sites that we have in our original layout and deployment of our fiber ring here and the conduit that we have around the city. I'll remind you that we are at that 96% completion and kind of hovers right at that point until we finally finish the Churchland Bridge. One of the things I failed to mention to you, but I want to make sure that I emphasize to you now, in the past, I don't think I emphasized it enough, is that the Churchland Bridge issue, while we're waiting for that completion, is for redundancy to complete. It's not that we can't use the backbone or the NGN that we have and the fiber that we have. Yes, we can start using it now. In fact, in a moment, I'm going to share with you how we are already using it. I mentioned to you also the last meeting that there's a small segment that's going across College Drive that we need to connect that actually goes through the city of Suffolk briefly, 75 feet only, 75 foot. We've had verbal agreement with the city of Suffolk, but we're just waiting on a written okay and approval from them. Once we get that, then our fiber construction company is going to go ahead and pull that. We're not too concerned about that process for our redundancy because the contractor we have, they're pulling fiber at like 3,000 feet a day. So we know this 75 feet won't be a problem, won't be an issue once we get that approval. And once we get that approval, it will be, at the worst, a week after that point, we'll be able to complete that. To introduce our fiber consultant, as I mentioned to you last meeting, Broadband Telecom Services LLC is the company that we awarded the contract to. Mr. Jeff Biku has over some 35 years in the telecom industry as experience. He actually worked regionally on the master plan for the region and the partnership that we have amongst our Southside cities to build the regional ring. He actually laid out that master plan and what that was to look like around the region. So he's very familiar with not only our local ring, but how that's going to be able to tie into the regional ring to offer some leverage and benefits to us as a city. Mr. Biku is also responsible for some $60 million in grant funding between 2022 and 2023, as well as the IoT Smart City Development design. And with that, I introduce to you Mr. Jeff Biku.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for having me.
Great.
It's a pleasure, as always.
Yes.
And good to see you again.
It is.
So I'm going to start off by just kind of giving an overview. A lot of the projects, some of the projects I put on this presentation, it's relevant to citizens, and it's some of the projects we are working on in other cities. And I think by going over them, you'll see the benefit of how it actually will benefit Portsmouth itself. There is Sea level rise has always been an initiative for all councils. Air quality control, we want to try to do the best for our citizens, and these are things that I think not only will it work in one city, but as we develop plans in one city, it's easy to replicate it and do a regional effort on it as well. So this is where we're going to start off with, and this is actually a smart pole. This pole is solar powered. It's battery operated. There's batteries inside it. It doesn't look like a smart pole, but it is deployed anywhere that you need to run it. You don't need to run infrastructure. So basically, you don't have to run power to this pole. If you had an area where you wanted to put a camera, if you wanted to put Wi-Fi, you can just put one of these poles down, and they will power the equipment. So no need to spend a lot of money on getting power, power cables and so forth. All you have to do is identify, design a network. What we do is we'll work on the actual power usage, the draws, and what we're putting on it, and then utilize that to design a network and deploy it. In Virginia Beach, so this is the boardwalk, there is about 200 poles, light poles going on the boardwalk. What we did is we took one, retrofitted it, so that one pole basically there is not connected to any kind of power. The rest of them are all connected to power. And this one turns on and off at the same time every day and night as the other poles that's out there. It was a pilot, it was done as a test so that we can utilize the poles, see how it worked, check the quality of the longevity of it, if it's gonna, if there's gonna be issues with it or anything else. But it's been up for 2 years now and works fine. So just the functionality or the off-grid capabilities are amazing. So one of our pilot programs we're working on is Mount TRASHMORE. I'm sure everybody here is familiar with Mount TRASHMORE Park. It's a very high-use park. It is used, but there is a stage area that was put there. This park is packed all the time. The city itself had some issues with public safety there, where there was some vandalism, people breaking into cars. There's actually a kids park over there that they wanted to cover with cameras too. So we came in with a solution. Basically what we did is we developed on the right bottom side there, you'll see 5 smart poles deployed. We installed PTZ cameras, 180-degree cameras, and Mount TRASHMORE is also built on a garbage dump, of course. So one of the things that we know citizens are always concerned about is methane gas. What we ended up doing is we're developing a methane gas sensor to go on the poles, on one of the poles, to check the air quality for methane gas in TRASHMORE. It's going to be monitored by the city. I'll go a little deeper into how this benefits your NGN. So we did 3 pilots. We wanted to see the capabilities of fiber backhaul, utilizing an existing internet service provider, and then 5G backhaul with modems. Mount TRASHMORE itself is based on 5G backhaul with modems, and all the network goes back to the public safety system, which is Genetec. The police have access to it, nobody else has access to it, so it is a secured network. The city is absolutely ecstatic about it because the cost of this project, if you had to run power to all those poles, if you had to get infrastructure to power up those cameras, and that top right picture is actually a picture of the coming from the pole that actually is the live feed. So it's not live on this presentation, but it is a live feed, and it's a PTZ camera, so you can go 360 degrees. That camera itself can zoom in right across that, all the way across the water, and get a license plate of a car, and it's actually driving by if you need to. So as you can see, this took some work for the design. We did not put Wi-Fi in this park itself because the local cable company ended up putting Wi-Fi in there, but we could have. But for now, the city only wanted cameras, and we are looking at sensors that will be deployed in TRASHMORE. But it is up and running, and no issues so far. We're also doing data analytics and collecting all the data as far as power usage, uptime, how many, if there is draws on the poles. So we're checking all the boxes to make sure that these are reliable networks that actually can be deployed regionally. Farmers market. So what we did in the farmers market is we took the city's fiber feed, we put in the smart poles, and we connected the wireless network to the city's fiber feed. This farmers market, vendors over there were having a huge amount of problems connecting to Wi-Fi, connecting to any kind of network. They were having problems running their building systems and everything else. So this was one of the city council's initiative, was how do we get those vendors happy, also have some public safety initiatives there. So we installed cameras. There's one camera on the pole. There's three poles deployed, and there's Wi-Fi that covers the whole area that's fed from the city's network. And this is a big one here. So town center. So I think everybody here knows with the pavilion by the waterfalls, the Ruth Chris, that whole area where they have the live bands. Big problem for the city itself. People were vandalizing lights. They were pulling speakers down. There's a lot of issues. So the original quote to get cameras to this area, where they needed 6 cameras and they needed it done immediately. The original quote was about $800,000 to get cameras up and running into this pavilion area. What we ended up doing is, if you look on the right-hand side, that's the Weston. We put we connected the backhaul to fiber and used 60 gigahertz to feed the cameras in the pavilion. Well, that cost was $30,000. So $800,000, $30,000, and they got camera systems, and those cameras are also networked on the public safety police system. So no issues there. We monitor it, we track it. We've had 5 non-reliabilities on those cameras since they've been installed. So before we get into that, any questions so far on anything I've discussed?
Can I just ask a quick question? I know one of the things that as we incorporate security cameras around the city, we had to be in contact with Dominion Power, because Dominion Power wouldn't let us use their actual poles for that, and we had to build new poles in order to do that. Was that something that you all...
So the poles in TRASHMORE, the poles in TRASHMORE were new poles. The poles we used in Town Center, they were existing poles, but they were owned by the city. So the city was we were able to do it with the
So
city.
most of our poles are not owned by the city because we have Dominion. So we've had to, in order to address some of the issues we had around the city for security, we've had to incorporate our poles. But Dominion was still played a part of it because they feed off of something. And that's been a big, not an issue, but I don't think people were as familiar because they thought they could just hook a camera up to an existing Dominion pole, and that's not happening.
Switch power, different things that
Right.
you have to make sure that the power doesn't go off and so
Yeah,
forth.
just wanted to make them aware because that is an additional cost in order to have those poles for camera systems. And with this,
I found that the city itself is, parks has been a big thing, parks and recreation, and they're the biggest client for this kind of type of technologies. They save a lot of money, and it protects their parks. So, any
I
kind of
agree.
vandalism, so forth, no problems.
Mr. Moody has a question.
Are the traffic light poles that normally at intersections, are they compatible with that?
Well, that's good. That's not going to be. It's the whole purpose is to look at how we can save money on deploying these. Think of the pole as a power source. So a traffic light already has power. It already has the infrastructure to put a camera on. Where the city will put a traffic light camera on, no problem. So that doesn't really fit into this for the project itself.
right, because we have the traffic light cameras already on the thing, but they're not this. They're just totally separate for managing the lights on and off, the green and red. But these are completely separate. And the traffic light cameras we have don't pick up. They weren't used for that purpose, and they're not purpose for what we're talking about, security.
Yeah, those sensory cameras were never designed for high definition images. They're just to pick up somewhat of what approaches the light, and it can detect that a vehicle has approached. Then it will trigger the light. But it was never designed to be able to have the function that we need. As Ms. Terry mentioned, our public safety folks, our police, they want to be able to hone into whose car, maybe it was someone trying to get away or whatever, trying to hit and run. They'll be able to zoom right into that license plate and see exactly who that was.
Madam City Attorney, and then Mr. Hugo.
Okay. Who manufactures the poles?
A company called Clearworld.
Clear World?
Yeah.
Where are they based out of?
Metairie, Louisiana. So what we did is, before we even looked at them, we did an RFP for request for information on the different types of poles there were, and because we have to look at power draws and what kind of equipment. It's not just putting something on the pole and saying it's going to work. We wanted to see the specs. We wanted to see how long the devices will work with 3-4 days of darkness. So they matched all our specs, and that's why we started using Clearworld. But there was a lot of due diligence that went into identifying the types of poles. The looks, simple little thing like the flat solar panels, basically birds poop on them, right? And then you end up having a serious maintenance issue. These ones are round, and they also look, pleasing. So it's not, you don't have a big eyesore.
Mr. Hugo?
So I don't think I heard you say what a smart pole costs.
So there is different flavors of it. It depends on the type of how much power. So if you're just putting a light on it with a simple Wi-Fi access point, you need a 250 watt, battery system, and that could run about $8,000. Okay, if you're looking at one that's actually fully loaded with 850 watts, that'll power up your cameras, your Wi-Fi access points, a methane sensor. Okay, that could run about $15,000.
Okay, and as I recall, Chief Jenkins is going after cameras that are high-resolution cameras to deploy for FUSIS. Does it make sense that we try to get those cameras mounted on smart poles rather than messing around with Dominion?
So we work closely with Chief Jenkins, and there are some things that are in motion already.
Yeah.
But then this is going to be an ongoing effort with connecting cameras to the FUSIS project that they have going on. And so we'll approach it from the standpoint of whatever's new and deployed will be able to be connected back to the real-time crime center, and they can actually be observed from a centralized place, and it'll be any of the cameras that we, going forward, that we deploy and that we hook up in the city.
So the cameras that he's installing, are they powered from Dominion Energy on their poles?
That they're using now, yeah.
Okay.
But like I said, going forward, we're in communications with them, and we're going to synchronize with them to make sure that we're leveraging what we have for that purpose.
Thank you.
I think at the end of the day, it's about identifying the location, seeing the cost, doing the cost analysis of it, and seeing what's feasible. If it's going to cost a lot of money because you're in a high traffic area to put this thing out there, or basically you're going a rural area, to run infrastructure. It's basically analyzing costs and seeing what's the best, to deploy it.
Mr. Tillage?
Thank you, Vice Mayor. Can these poles be used for like a multicellular small cell site? So in our city, we have a lot of dead cell phone service areas. Is there like a way to be able to make a booster put onto these?
So two things to that, right? If it's boosting cell services, yes. If it's part of putting infrastructure for the cell carriers, no. because the cell carriers we require too much power, especially with 5G. 5G, if you look at them, they have, I mean, these will be used as backup, right? But you have primary power and backup.
Yeah.
But for 5G, it won't work. If you're just looking at increasing, as a repeater, or you have a dead zone where you need to enhance your cell service, yes, absolutely.
So basically, for example, we come across the Churchland Bridge, and I've used this before, phones drop. And Mr. Hayes did a good job explaining to me the other day how that, how the towers work. But, of course, that's a carrier situation. And so would these boosters help to mitigate me going across the bridge and my call dropping? No.
Because you got to think of commercial grade, so that would have to be something that the cell carrier would have to do and put a booster, because that's where they have a dead spot. And one of the things right now that's happening is most of these carriers, if you notice that your 4G and your 5G, so your 4G used to be great service. Now, because they've upgraded to 5G and they want people to spend money on 5G and their phones and all that, your 4G has 4 signal bars, but it's terrible bandwidth, and you're dropping calls left and right. You can't. There's nothing really you can do about it. They got us by the neck. So.
Gotcha.
Madam City.
And I hope I didn't get too off, but I was just making sure that we're talking about the poles because we're going to use them to house our fiber. We got on cameras. I just didn't want to.
Yes.
I thought it was me.
Right.
I just want to make sure.
So
What we doing?
The whole idea, correct. So this is the broadband meeting.
Right.
What we were doing is letting you see, additionally, beyond just the use of the fiber for our technology, government use and processing, other ways that
It could be.
the fiber can actually benefit us, because with the cameras that we have going across the city, in order for them to be utilized, you're going to pay somebody. You're going to either be paying a cell carrier for the cell service of those cameras, or the way that the Wi-Fi works. The Wi-Fi is just pulling in a signal that's connected to a hard line. You're going to pay whoever it is that's providing that hard line.
Right.
Or the benefit or the cost avoidance is we have our own fiber network.
Perfect.
And so we will connect to our own fiber network. So sorry for that lack of explanation. Like,
But it's
the
perfect.
broadband meeting and we're talking about cameras.
I just got a little confused.
But as
I
you
just
can-
thought it was
as
That
you
was
can
actually my
see.
same question, because I wanted to see how the
All
broadband was tying
attached.
into the poles, and if we're going to need a pole for every mile of fiber that we have run to be able
If
to
you have a fiber going from your NGN to the park,
Right.
you can actually use from that park, and you can you can feed off into multiple different locations with cameras and so forth.
So we're back to the original reason we even entered into a fiber network to save money based
all these are
on.
benefits.
Absolutely.
All right, it ties all back around.
And you'll be able to see,
Okay.
as he's explained, there's some parallel uses that we have in the city. I wanted him to give concrete examples
Perfect.
of a neighboring city. You look at the town center, where they had an issue where they wanted to be able to monitor what's going on because of some crime areas and some things going on. Well, look at what it would have cost, $800,000 to lay that infrastructure and those cameras out so that they could be able to backhaul it back to the central location and view that footage. Well, by using this technology that he has proposed to them, not only proposed, but they are implementing, they avoided the $800,000 cost and ended up spending, I think it was $27,000, you say $30,000 versus $800,000. So I know, working with our police department, the many uses that they're trying to fit without giving away to the public what exactly is happening. But there are some parallel uses that we'll be able to deploy ourselves here in the city and be able to have the cost avoidance and savings in order to deploy this technology.
Perfect.
Thank you. All right. Members, if there are no more questions, Mr. Biko, you can continue. Yes.
So let's go over and review the Valley Bead process. Cliff did a good job of talking you through it, how much money is out there. This is unprecedented. You're not going to have this opportunity ever again. I'll talk a little bit about the challenges. So right now, the BEAD requirements for funding is if you're not meeting 100 over 20 megabits per second, you qualify for funding. Understanding what the challenges is, meaning that if you have an area, and I'm sure everybody here has experienced this, where you're saying that your home is served and you're supposed to be getting, bandwidth, and you're on the internet and you're not getting, it's not working. It's an unserved or underserved area. So what we will be doing is putting a challenge process together. And then what we'll be doing is also looking at working with HRPDC as far as how to go through the application process on behalf of the cities we work with. And then we're going to do a presentation in October to the SNA as far as how much the unserved, underserved areas.
So just to touch on that term that he used, challenge process. Originally, the FCC wanted to know across the country, where is it that people have high-speed internet? I don't like to use that term broadband because it changes depending on the administration. The FCC will say certain speeds are defined as broadband. Another administration comes in, well, we want to lower the speeds to meet that definition. And when they lower the speeds to meet that definition, it makes the map look like there's more coverage adequately than it really is. The speeds haven't changed, it's just that they changed the definition. And then it makes it look like more people have the internet connection at high speeds that they need. Well, what we want to do is make sure that regardless of, it has been redefined what those speeds that are adequate actually are. In time, that changes. The demand changes. It's just like your cell phones. Remember the proliferation of cell towers, right? When cell phones first came out, you had people with providers had an adequate number of cell towers available. Well, then they knew the technology was shifting and there would be more images and video needed, so they needed to put up more towers for higher speeds, more redundancy and access to pull that data across that wireless network. Well, with regards to fiber, that is going to provide for you opportunities at higher speeds than we've ever had in the past with fiber. And so that being the case, COVID has taught us all how we really need to be not only connected, but how we need to be connected at high speeds. Whether you're talking healthcare and telemedicine, whether you're talking educating the kids in schools, needing to have virtual visits with the instructors or teachers, whether it's businesses that want to be connected and doing research. So we've learned that there is a much greater need. So from a federal level on down through the state level, there's unprecedented funding coming down because historically the providers haven't done this. They haven't seen where it was profitable to run everywhere. But with all of this funding that's coming now, there really won't be an excuse to not have, full saturation across the entire Commonwealth. And so we're just positioning ourselves to challenge the maps that were already laid out and drawn, purporting to have the type of coverage that everybody needs when we know that's not the case. Mm-hmm. So we challenge those maps by connecting with the citizens, and Mr. Biku is going to explain in a minute how we're going to get the information from those addresses up to our state, who will challenge on our behalf to the feds that we don't have the adequate speeds in every one of these locations.
Yeah, I just want to add to that. The challenge process is critical because it's really up to the cities to say, look, I want my residents to have what's required as far as bandwidth goes, and they deserve 100 over 20, whether it's an underserved area. The DHCD has put some different guidelines out, but the challenge process has to come from the city themselves, because it's gonna take that data and let the FCC know and DHCD know which areas can be funded. So if you're not meeting 100 over 20, it's a fundable census block. We're not using census blocks anymore. We're using actually home or area. So before it was census blocks, where you would have a provider that would take up, I'd say, this whole area, 5 homes in this census block is covered, and it's all getting 100 over 20. Not the case, because now we're actually going in there and asking the citizens, hey, are you getting what you're supposed to be getting as far as 100 over 20 in bandwidth, and also paying the right prices. So in the essence of time, I'm going to kind of speak
Mr.
through this.
Biko, could we,
Yeah.
Mr. Glover has a question.
I have a question. When you say challenge, I just want to make sure I'm clear. And you just indicated the challenge has to come from the locality in regards to meeting that standard. Is that in a form of a legislative package to the state government, who will then challenge the federal government? Is that in the form of members of our city council marching up to our representatives local to the General Assembly in a letter form or whatever form that's indicated to say that we want you to challenge the federal government so that we can ensure that we are getting the fair and equitable treatment to meet that standard for our people?
So we will put together a package that will lay out a list of the addresses that we're challenging according to the speeds that we have found to be inadequate.
Okay.
And with that, then the state will take that to the feds on our behalf.
Got it. Thank you, sir.
Everything runs through DHCD.
Right.
Mr. Whitaker.
So based on the process that you're going through with the challenge issue and making sure that what the feds are saying is there and what is actually there, how will that impact the residents as far as their Wi-Fi service? How will they be actually impacted by this?
Well, it's not impacting them now. It's just gathering data that they will submit. So, and this process came out from DHCD and the feds, basically, and they're saying, develop a website, have your residents go to do a speed test and gather that data. That data will actually, once it compile all that data, it will be able to help with the challenge process. So if you look, March 8th deadline for challenge rebuttals, that's out next year, and that's when you get all the data, and then you send it off to DHCD, and they're going to be the ones that's going to take that data and then deal with the feds on it.
I mean, the end result is that we would want a city that has services that are not interrupted in any area, that citizens have access to Wi-Fi throughout the city through our service. Is that an end result?
That's the end result. In their home,
Right
in their home,
And schools.
they will have not only adequate, but much higher speeds than they would have had before. I mean, we have these examples across the Commonwealth where people are driving to the local fast food shop because they have Wi-Fi at the fast food store with the kids in the car doing homework because their assignment in school is something that they have to research over the internet, right? And at home, they don't have the adequate speeds either. They can't afford to pay higher tiers of speeds and so forth. And for me, to give you how they benefit, the Constitution says that every child in the Commonwealth will have quality education through the public education process, right? For historical purposes, we might look at the disparity being books that have been handed down that are used and old in some schools, and others are getting brand new books. Well, for me, I see that as a challenge also, because if someone has high-speed internet and they can do their homework or research and finish in an hour, but someone else is taking them 6 hours because of the lower lacking speeds for them to do their same assignment, then the question is whether or not that is, being equitable in terms of, that education process. So that's just an example, I think, that shows how this can benefit our citizens.
And Dr. Whitaker, if you're looking for the exact reason of how a challenge can then result in this gap closing, that's through grant money. So the more homes, the more addresses that are listed as underserved or not served, then grant money gets appropriated there. And then third parties can come in and use that grant money to build out to that location.
And then ultimately, when you start talking about the cost, for example, that a resident has to pay for Wi-Fi service, what would be our leverage to lower those costs for our residents?
So there are specific programs, like, there's specific programs for unserved, underserved. That's a completely different venue. Basically, getting the connection to the house and making sure the house has the proper bandwidth is one thing, and the grants will cover that. Mm-hmm. But then they had to have the school programs, where the lunch programs, where students or parents can't afford high speed. They can enroll in programs like that, as long as their home has the connections or the speeds available to them.
And also what you'll see is as a strategy that we have going on, the nature of what we're doing is creating interest of providers. So instead of a couple of providers being available, what it will do if you go from, 3 or 4 providers to 20 providers, and people have options, then the cost begins to be driven down competitively amongst those who are offering the service.
Okay.
So the cost for the services and the fact that you have higher speeds, everybody wins.
Right. Yeah, because it's one thing to have it at my house. There's another thing, can I access it because of cost? And so that's what I see, how is this going to benefit our citizens cost-wise to actually use it? Yeah, so that is.
We are working with the school boards too to get a list of addresses of students who cannot afford, and there are special programs that we're going to be targeting those students as well, as far as.
Yeah, Mr. Moody had a question as well. Mr. Moody.
Well, my question is to follow up on the relatively short deadline to present the challenge. Has the Commonwealth or FCC given the format on what that looks like in a response?
The HCD has. They've actually given the format out.
Okay, so we know what that format is.
Yeah. There's certain things that's gonna, they have not issued the actual date for when the applications are gonna be due for BEAD. They've allocated the dates for VADI, but again, VADI has been 50 million has been allocated towards VADI. 1.48 billion has been allocated towards BEAD. We are working on the BEAD, not VADI, because the providers are for applicants through VADI are going to be smaller companies, providing services. There's less stringent rules for getting VADI money. The BEAD is very strict about how they are actually going to be giving out that money, but they're going to go after, the bigger companies are actually going to go after the BEAD funding. So with this one, I kind of wanted to have everyone kind of remember what their vision for broadband is, and I'm hoping that the things we're going through right now is going to give you, kind of open up your minds to how we can actually make this vision come through. And, you know, your vision has always been to use the ring as a backbone for your digital ecosystem. So now you're seeing smart city stuff. You're seeing, you know, broadband, gathering data for underserved areas, getting your MDUs connected, public safety for cameras. All that is actually part of utilizing your NGN. One of the next things we're going to be doing is working on getting a design done that will take your NGN and make it 5.9 reliable so that you're not going to have any issues. Everything is going to be working 100%. And we're looking at connecting your 700 Port Center Parkway building to a carrier-neutral facility and tying in all your community anchor facilities with a high-speed circuit. Now, we'll kind of go over that a little bit. So these are just approximate numbers. They are not in any way accurate. We're going to be doing a market analysis to identify true cost and true savings for a cost avoidance model, but kind of wanted to give an overview of how this works. So right now you have 56 sites, not including schools or other community anchor institutions. Let's say you're paying $1,000 for a bandwidth circuit at those sites, right? So your monthly is $56,000, 10 years, $6.7 million. The beauty of having a fiber network that ties everything in is you take all those sites are connected by fiber. You're now what's called on an on-net circuit, meaning your cost of circuits are by tying into your carrier-neutral facilities and your subsea cables. Your cost of circuits is going for a 10 gig circuit. You're going to be paying about $1,200 a month. If you want a 20 gig, it's going to be maybe half the price, which serves can serve a whole city, can serve schools. It also actually is able to tie all your community anchor institutions together. So these, in 10 years, 2.16 average. You're looking at an average of like 80% or 70, 80% savings by utilizing your NGN. Spread it over some time, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. The math, kind of all adds up, right?
Yes, sir.
Cliff?
I think there was some interest last time in knowing, or earlier in the meeting, I emphasized how the Churchland Bridge construction is limiting us only to the point that we can't have full redundancy yet. However, it doesn't limit us from starting to light up on a single strand, not single strand, but without a redundant path. We're using the fiber now. So 206 High Street, that's our police headquarters for the administration. That's on our existing fiber. The 311 building, which is our EOC, the fire admin, they're on it. 700 Port Center property, they're on it. And then, of course, we are building or have built out at our compound where we have multiple buildings at the compound. We have literally laid fiber across that property, whereas in the past, it was no fiber running from building to building. It was connected via wireless fidelity, which was not as reliable. It was spotty, to say the least. And now we have connected those buildings with fiber all around that property, making it more reliable, and there are faster speeds back to our data center.
All right, so here's your NGN. This map is very basic right now. What we're going to be doing is looking at developing a market strategy. So in time, this map is going to be populated with all your community anchor institutions, strategic growth areas, economic development properties, unserved areas, so you can get a good visual of how this all comes together.
Do you want to say something about preparing?
This is the RCR, and you can see where Portsmouth is, right next to the big square. Portsmouth's right there. Just wanted to remind everybody that 6 strands of fiber from the RCR will be allocated towards the cities. Ultimately tying all the cities together in the 5 Southside cities. which now gives you this, which becomes your whole mega region, and is kind of tying all the initiatives that we're doing, that we have out there, as far as Hampton Roads, economic development now, regional IoT, and so forth. Questions?
Any additional questions? Mr. Hugo?
So who's doing our design?
For your fiber design,
Yep.
I'll be working with Cliff on that.
So we're doing it in-house.
So when you say the design, what specifically are you?
The connections of our city, I'll call it the intranet, so connecting all the city facilities. Who's doing that design?
Yeah, we'll be working with our consultant to get that done.
So there's two phases to that. We'll work together on an initial design. Let's call it the hypothetical, where everything goes. Once it's implemented, then we'll have to get a true design done, 100% design. It actually shows where the fiber goes, how everything's tied in. But you have to do a baseline, and that'll be in the market analysis.
And so that design is also taken into consideration where our business communities are that we want to market to.
All part of the market analysis, correct.
Okay. And then who's doing the installation work? Is that a contractor? And is that contract in place, or is it a series of contracts, or how are we doing that?
So this all starts with, we have to follow the same process as any procurement mechanism that the city has. So first we'll do the design, hypothetical 30% in-house, and then we'll look at the cost, create a budget for it, see what the numbers are, and then identify contractors are going to have to be RFP'd out, and who's going to give the best price to install.
Okay, so we're not doing the install in-house with Portsmouth employees.
Some of the design of some of the equipment is done in-house. But we have a contractor that lays out and works along with some of our staff for the configuration of the equipment. And once, we get that model down, we do it in-house, the rest, as opposed to leaving all of that done externally. But in terms of running additional cable and fiber, et cetera, no, we don't have the staff to be able to do that. We have to contract that out. And
So fiber isn't treated like a public utility, like sewer and water, and you're approaching this with contractors doing the work for you.
yeah.
How about the care and feeding once it's in the ground? What needs to be done to care and feed it? Anything? It just sits there forever. Works forever.
You got a
You have to have
maintenance.
SLA with it, right? There's service level agreements that you have to have, and again, who does it right now for your local operator?
In terms of, you're speaking to the future
active
fiber
fiber.
network.
Yeah, fiber in the ground.
Yeah, he's talking about who's doing it. So currently, we have a contractor responsible for that. We have an agreement with them. If something happens to it, there's an agreement that they will respond within a couple of hours for that cut or that problem with the fiber. And they are charged with getting it back, running again
Okay.
or working again.
So that's not a general maintenance agreement, that's an on-call type of agreement?
Service level agreement, so whatever terms are in the service level agreement, you want quick responses if you have a fiber break, so you have to put all those terms in there.
Okay.
You showed a timeline, a few screens back, and are we on target with that to complete?
Yes,
Listen.
we'll update you on the schedule next meeting.
Okay. Any other questions from our members? Not. Thank you for the presentation.
Thank
for
you,
the
everyone.
information. Mr. Hayes, Attorney Swearinger. Okay. We will move on. no closed session items to discuss. And new business, are there any topics that the members would like to hear? I know the resolution is one that we would like to know if we're on track with that. And also the applications for recruiting of members, where we are with that process.
So we have the language, it has to be approved and discussed by the council, so that's going to be in the work session.
Okay.
So you'll see that there.
Okay.
And that's all part of the process with the recruitment. Once you all do the changeover, then we know exactly what you're looking for. We can go from there.
All right, if there are no other comments or questions or concerns, our next meeting will be October 10th. I don't think we have any public speakers signed up today. All right, then this meeting is adjourned.